Hi, my name is Dr. John Alchemy with RateFast. Today I'm going to be talking to you about impairment rating anatomy and applications and talking specifically about the AMA guides, what's called the Four Corners rating in California versus the Almarez-Guzman analysis. Now, I get a lot of questions about this, and it's a complicated legal issue if you're trying to think about it in legal terms. But from a medical standpoint, it's really not that complicated, and I'm going to walk you through it. And in fact, the AMA guides, I just want to be clear, AMA guides, impairment ratings, are delivered in something called whole person impairment. And that whole person impairment range goes from 0 all the way up to 100. And that range at 0 means that you have no impairment at all, no problems, and you're actually fine. You have no limitations, no functional limitations. You can do all of your activities of daily living. You're doing great. And that number goes from 0 all the way up to 100%. Now, at 100%, this is someone who's approaching death, according to the AMA guides, or basically dependent on someone else or others for all of their activities of daily living. You're basically bedridden. Maybe you're on a ventilator. Maybe you're paralyzed. All of these things are up near 100%. So the first and most important thing when we're talking about four corner ratings, which means a standard rating coming out of the chapter of the AMA guides with the best integrity exam that's possible or available at the time of the rating, is the whole person impairment. Now they call that the four corners, and that's something that has come up as more of a legal jargon. Basically, it just means this is a chapter rating, a straight rating based on the AMA guides, chapters and figures. That's all that it is. So, and that's usually what we get from primary treaters. We get a whole person impairment and it's a four corners rating. But whether you're a primary treater or a QME or an AME, you're also required as the doctor of record to give an opinion if Almarez-Guzman is allowable. And I'm going to back up a little bit. What's Almarez-Guzman? Almarez-Guzman, in short, is just the legal case name when a case came up. And the doctor basically said this: the four corners rating, the table and the charts that gave the value, are not an accurate value of this individual's loss of their activities of daily living. And remember, the activities of daily living, be sure you go check it out, page 4, table 1-2. There's 34 activities on there. And it's good to be familiar with these when you're taking history or if you're writing impairment reports. But the Almarez-Guzman basically says is that, well, if the four corners rating is not an accurate description of their functional loss, again, table 1-2, page 4 of the AMA guides, then I can come up with another value. Now, the problem is that the legal guidance, the people who came up with this whole concept of Almarez-Guzman and put it into law, labor code, has to be considered in every rating. They never really talked at all about how to do Almarez-Guzman. It's basically they said, well, we'll let the doctor come up with a value. He or she can describe it best as they want. And then we'll kind of decide if it meets evidence and it sounds like a real rating. I mean, that's basically what it is in a nutshell. So when you're looking at impairment ratings, not all PTP reports will have it. Most QMEs and AMEs will have it in there. But remember, it's a simple question. I have a four corners rating. You have to do that regardless. But then, did the doctor discuss about the Almarez-Guzman or the functional loss? Is the functional loss, in the doctor's opinion, adequately expressed in the whole person impairment value? But if the functional loss is adequately reflected in the whole person impairment rating, then there is no Almarez-Guzman rating. The Almarez-Guzman comes into play when the four corners rating, the tables in the chapter, do not reflect the loss of the individual's function. So let me give you an example. Let's say I have a back injury that's 0%. Maybe it's 0% because there's a bunch of data missing. Maybe it's 0% because I have full range of motion, my strength's intact, but I still have pain that limits function. Maybe I can't lift something. Maybe it wakes me up from night at sleep. And the AMA guides goes very much out of its way on page 5 that says the only way you can get a 0% whole person impairment is if there's no loss of activities of daily living. So when you're a professional and you're looking at reports, or you're a doctor and you're trying to write a report, if you're getting a 0 on the table and chapter, but the patient has, in your opinion, legitimate loss of activities of daily living in their description and based on your history, you cannot give them a 0. So now you have to go and do something called the Almarez-Guzman analysis. Now it's really interesting because the AMA Guides has already figured this out, and they figured it out on page 5. It basically said if you have a loss of function, you cannot be a 0. But California had to go through a couple of cases and a couple of examples and understand what it meant in the context of California Labor Code. But it's basically the same thing from a doctor's standpoint. I can't give someone a 0 if they have activities of daily living, and I think they truly have a condition that is not otherwise expressed well in the table, and they received a 0 or maybe a 1 or a 2. Now, the real trick and the real black box in doing this is that the doctors were not given any instruction on how to do an Almarez-Guzman analysis. And that's where RateFast is a little bit different, because RateFast actually counts and looks and interpolates your activities of daily living to figure out if there is a match between your four corners rating, again, the chapter and table, or with your activities of daily living. And it's a very simple, straightforward concept when you think about it. But basically all you do is you put all the activities of daily living on a scaled value. For instance, a shoulder, 54% whole person impairment, a knee, maybe 32% whole person impairment. And you can actually figure out quite accurately if you have 2 out of the 34 activities of daily living missing, how much is that for a shoulder? Maybe it's 4%. How much is that for a knee? Maybe it's 2%. And actually, we have standardized the process of Almarez-Guzman using a very predictable, calculatable way to do that. And what's really great about RateFast, and again, I'm not trying to sell you reports, but I want you to think about this, because RateFast does this automatically. Every single report gets a chapter rating. It gets a four corners. Of course it does. But in the background, the Almarez-Guzman value, or the loss of ADLs, is always calculated. Whether or not it says it's Almarez-Guzman or not doesn't matter. Every case is calculated. And therefore, we know for sure if the four corners is accurate with its respect of communicating loss of activities of daily living function. So we know that number before the rating even gets finished. We know if we're looking at an Almarez-Guzman, and we also use AMA criteria to decide if the functional loss is within the four corners of the AMA guides. How do we do that? Page 20 of the AMA guides says 2 measurements are considered correct or reproducible if they're within 10% of one another. So it's a very simple calculation. Is their functional loss within 10% of their four corners rating? If it is, four corners rating it is. But if it's not, Almarez-Guzman it is. And that's a very simple and straightforward way to think about the difference between four corners and Almarez-Guzman. And I've seen people get stressed out about this, adjusters, attorneys, judges trying to figure this out, letters going back and forth. Is this Almarez-Guzman? Is it not? Doctor, what do you think? Well, it's not really a guess. Sometimes it is for doctors because they're really not quite sure how to do the analysis. But in the most part, it's just doing the math a little bit differently. And so that is basically, in a nutshell, four corners versus Almarez-Guzman. I hope that's helpful.